Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is Reading Lesson 12, Books and Movies. In this lesson, we'll do a guided paragraph-by-paragraph reading. You can practice reading out loud by listening to each paragraph first, pausing the video at the end of the paragraph, and then reading out loud for yourself. While reading, we'll use the GASP method of guessing, answering questions, summarizing, and predicting. The GASP method will help us to read more quickly and fluently. We'll mark words and phrases that we don't understand, guessing at their meanings. At the end of each paragraph, we'll try to answer any questions you might have. We'll also summarize each paragraph. That means define the main idea. And finally, we'll predict what we'll read about in the next paragraph. Let's begin. Whenever I talk with my friends, the conversation always turns to what we're reading or watching. Are you reading anything good, they'll ask? Or, what are you watching these days? My answer lately has been, a lot. This introductory paragraph includes two questions. Are you reading anything good? And what are you watching these days? Notice that both of these questions use the present progressive tense, which we learned about in Grammar Lesson 12. This tells us that we'll be talking about things that we are currently watching and reading. Maybe not right at this moment because we are studying English right now, but lately. So when we see this phrase here, these days, we can guess that these days means lately, recently. So take a minute to reflect. Do you talk about books and television shows with your friends? Next, predict what you think we'll read about in the next paragraph. I love to read. Several years ago, my husband got me a Kindle as a gift, which I would use mostly on vacations to avoid carrying heavy books with me. The Kindle works well, but maybe I'm old-fashioned. I just prefer reading a real paper book. I like to buy used books that I can then lend to friends, or I borrow them from the library. During the pandemic, however, the libraries have been closed. It's still possible to borrow books, but it's not very convenient. So I've returned to my Kindle and I've been reading ebooks. It's so easy. Using an e-reader also helps me to learn new words. It's much easier to look up word definitions on an e-reader than with a paper book. Yes, English teachers still learn new words all the time. English has millions of vocabulary words. So in our listening class, we talked about what a Kindle was, an e-reader. Now, when we see words like this, e-books or e-readers, what does the E stand for? What does the E mean when we put an E in front of a regular word? It means electronic. Books are not usually electronic or digital. Another word that uses E often in front of it is email. In this paragraph, we see the word avoid, which is a vocabulary word from class 11, and then we see this word old-fashioned. You can probably guess what old-fashioned means just by looking at the word parts, old and fashion. And here I give an example of what it means to be old-fashioned, preferring to read a real paper book instead of a Kindle. In the next sentence, I say that I like to buy used books to lend to friends, or I borrow them from the library. Can you guess what lend and borrow mean? I'll give you a hint. These words are opposites. The next vocabulary word we see is convenient. Can you guess what convenient means? It says that I can borrow books from the library, but it's not convenient right now. What do you think convenient means? Finally, we have a phrasal verb, look up. We talked about look up briefly in English class 3. See if you can guess what it means to look up word definitions. This is a long paragraph with many ideas, but see if you can give us the main idea and then predict what you think we'll read about in the next paragraph. I like to read all kinds of things, but I love reading novels. Reading stories about people's lives, their challenges, and their triumphs is very satisfying, and I love getting lost in a book. NonFiction can be just as rewarding. After finishing 2 novels last week, I'm now in the middle of reading a book about libraries. I'm learning so much about how libraries function and serve our communities. In this paragraph, we continue to talk about reading, and we learn the word novels. If you don't know what a novel is, the next sentence gives us some clues. Novels are stories about people's lives, their challenges, their triumphs. The next sentence gives us a different topic, nonfiction. We know that nonfiction is different from novels, because it describes it as just as rewarding. Just as means equally. We're comparing these two things. This is not the same thing as novels, but it is equally rewarding. Then I give examples. I read 2 novels last week, and I'm now reading a book about libraries. So what do you think nonfiction could be? Finally, we have the verb function. What could you guess function means? What word could you put here that would make sense in the sentence? Let's summarize this paragraph by giving the main idea and predict what do you think we'll read about in the next paragraph. Lately, I've also started to read more poetry. I don't know much about poetry, but I'm starting to appreciate it more. Reading poetry is different from reading fiction or nonfiction. I think it requires us to use a different part of our brains. In this paragraph, we continue to talk about reading. Here, the topic is poetry. If you don't know what poetry is, we see here that it is different from fiction or nonfiction. So you can guess, what could we read that is not fiction or nonfiction? So poetry is kind of difficult to define. A lot of us learn poems when we're young. Sometimes they rhyme with similar sounds. They're often short. And poetry is not fiction or nonfiction. It's a different kind of artistic writing. It comes in many forms. What would you guess that this verb means, appreciate? Here are some reflecting questions. Do you like to read poetry? And do you agree with the last sentence of this paragraph? What do you think we will read about in the next paragraph? What I watch is more dependent on my husband, since the only time I watch television is with him in the evenings. We have very different tastes, but manage to find things we both enjoy. In the past year, we've watched historical dramas, comedies, action movies, and suspenseful dramas. I have a hard time watching violent or scary things, so I ask my friends for recommendations. Mostly we watch American and British shows, but we also watch some Spanish language shows since my husband is a Spanish speaker, and I'm always trying to improve my Spanish. Watching movies is a great way to improve language skills. Okay, so this is another long paragraph, and here we stop talking about reading and we start talking about watching, what we watch on television. What do you think the word dependent means? What I watch is more dependent on my husband because I watch television with him in the evenings. Next, we talk about tastes. We have very different tastes in things. So you might know the word taste as it's related to food, but we're not talking about food here. We're talking about television. What do you think this means? In this third sentence, we have a list of things, separated by commas. Historical dramas, comedies, action movies, and suspenseful dramas. We can see that this is a list of things we're watching. So you can guess that these are types of movies or types of TV shows. In the same way that novels or poetry or nonfiction are things that we could read, these are types of things we could watch. In the next sentence, I say I have a hard time watching violent or scary things. So I ask my friends for recommendations. What does it mean to have a hard time doing something? What are violent things? Violent must be related to scary. And then I ask my friends for recommendations. What do you think recommendations are? In the next sentence, we see the word shows, American and British shows. You probably know show as a verb, but what do you think show means as a noun? When you reach the end of this paragraph, I'd like you to summarize it and then predict what you think you'll read about in the next paragraph. Here's our final paragraph. In the past year, we've also watched French, Korean, Swedish, and German shows. If something has a good story, we're willing to read subtitles. Right now, we're watching the second season of a series about a family involved in all sorts of crime. It can get a little violent, but I'm enjoying it because of all the interesting characters. It's also set in a part of the country that I'm not at all familiar with, so I'm learning about the regional culture as well. So, how about you? Are you reading or watching anything good these days? In this last part, we continue to talk about what we're watching, and I list some other types of shows: French, Korean, Swedish, and German. If you don't know what these words mean, you can look at them and see that, because they start with capital letters, these are names of things, names of other languages, just like Spanish or English. Our third sentence starts with the phrase right now. It says, right now we're watching the second season of a series. What do you think this phrase right now means in the sentence? Do I mean that as I wrote this sentence or as I thought of this sentence, I was also watching a movie or a TV show? So even though right now is taken to mean at this moment, Oftentimes, we say right now to talk about things that we're doing lately, if it's obvious. While it's possible that I could be watching a TV show while writing this text, the word season here means many shows put together and created in one time period, usually 1 year. So it's really not possible to be watching many TV shows at one time. So if you say right now you're watching a season or a series of something, that means lately. Like maybe yesterday you watched one show, tonight you'll watch another, and tomorrow you're planning on watching another. We'll talk about these vocabulary words more in writing lesson 12. Here we also see the word characters. Characters are a word that we've talked about a little bit, but we definitely need to use this word when we're talking about books and movies. And finally, we have the word regional when talking about regional culture. If you don't know what regional is, you can guess it has to do with geography, because we're talking about a part of the country that I don't know. So it has to do with where something is located. So this reading ends with the same question that we started with, a conversation about what we're reading and watching. So take a minute to think about it. Are you reading or watching anything good these days? And do you like to read and watch things that are similar to what I like to read and watch? So to review, you should summarize what you've read, go back and review any parts that you are still confused about. If you need to, you can look up words in a dictionary, you can ask a friend for help, and reflect. Do you think reading books and watching movies is helpful to your English? Secondly, this reading mentions several genres or types of books and movies. Can you think of other genres that are not mentioned in this reading? So that's it for our reading lesson 12. Definitely continue with writing lesson 12, where we'll talk about all this vocabulary in greater detail. If you're enjoying these free lessons, please remember to like, comment, ask questions, and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.